It's good to be with you guys. Hi. Kind of feels like no time has passed. And then also it feels like a lot of time has passed. So I really grateful for the chance to come and be with you guys and share a little bit this morning, and was kind of thinking and praying about, where to go, and something more broadly than what we'll talk about this morning that's really just been like kind of underlined and underscored and highlighted for the last several years is that our relationship with God has a lot of dynamics. It changes because we change. And I also think it changes because God in himself is incredibly dynamic. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, like, certain friends or family that you have who have certain, qualities about them draw out certain things about you, so that when you're hanging out with that really funny uncle, maybe you even become a little bit funny or something like that. Has anybody ever experienced that? Yeah? Or if you hang around Wes a little too long, you might start to get a little bit of an accent, a little bit of a southern drawl. And I think that's true with God too, that because God is so dynamic and there are so many various qualities of him, when we hang around him, it draws those qualities out in us. And that can vary in different seasons of our lives. And so I want to look at kind of one particular dynamic with you that has especially felt highlighted to me, and that's this thing of hiddenness and manifestation. And let me tell you a story. So soon after I left here 4 years ago, we moved to Illinois, and I had my handyman business that I was kind of restarting in that area, and we were a few months in. We were going to this church, which is the church that we're heading to now, the chapel. Very large church, multi-site, and was getting to know the senior leaders, Scott and Tammy, there a little bit. And I was also internally just really struggling with the fact that I was all in on handyman work and not doing pastoral ministry. There's so many things about pastoral ministry that are an expression of who I am and like an expression of my journey with God. And so it felt a little bit like I've lost a part of myself as I'm doing handyman work. And I remember I had kind of gotten wind, a little rumor that there was a bit of an issue with the staff at the chapel. And there was some conflict, and they were working through it. And it was kind of in the midst of hearing that I got a call from Tammy, one of the senior leaders. And so I see her name pop up on my phone. She's calling, and immediately in that moment, my mind goes to, she's calling me because she knows that I'm a pastor, I'm an expert. Maybe they need my help. Maybe they know that I'm good at dealing with conflict, or more likely they're calling to see if I can fill a staff position temporarily. I'm just sure that this is why she's calling, and it feels really good. And I'm starting to practice my response, what I'm going to say. And I pick up and I say, "Hey, Tammy." She goes, "Hey, I know it's the night before Thanksgiving, but do you unclog kitchen sinks?" And my heart was in my throat. I was like, oh yeah, like no one here knows me that way. I'm a handyman. Like that's how people know me now. And it like my heart sank. Like it was really painful and really humbling. And I was like, yeah, I can probably do that. And so I go there. I drop my family off at home, and I head to their house, and I go in, and they welcome me warmly, and I go to the kitchen sink, and I'm under the sink, and I'm, taking things apart, putting them back together, running water, still clogged. Do it a couple times, still clogged. So I call my father-in-law. He's my on-call pro. So I call him, and he's like, "Is there a basement?" I'm like, "Yep." So I walk down to the basement. He says, "Look for a clean-out." What do you call it? Clean-out plug, right? Yeah, in the drain from the sink. I'm like, "Okay, I see two of them." He's like, "Okay, find a 5-gallon bucket." Okay, so I get up on a ladder, And he's like, have your bucket ready, So I have my bucket ready, and I open the first one, nothing happens, okay? I close that up, move the ladder, go to the next one, and now I'm not quite as careful because nothing happened the first time. And I have my bucket there, and I unclog it. And what I didn't account for was the geometry of the situation. That there's rafters, and the drain line is in the rafters, and so I can only get my 5-gallon bucket so close. And there was so much force coming out of that opening that it hit the rafter, and it went on me. And I'm just kind of frozen, holding my bucket while it's like smelly kitchen grime is coming all over me. And I'm standing up on the ladder, and I'm like, the bucket's not feeling any heavier, And I look, and there's just, like this little bit on the bottom of the bucket, and the rest is just, I'm just drenched. And I'm frozen on the ladder, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what decision did I make? Why? Why did I do this? I had things so well in my life. And it was in that moment, I felt just like a deep grief come to the surface. But at the same time, I still can't quite put my finger on it, but there was this like joy. And I think, as I look back at that moment, I think that the Lord was showing me, piece by piece, that he was inviting me into a place of hiddenness, where no one's seeing me, no one's patting me on the back. I'm not doing the things in front of the world that feel like it's me, I get to express myself. And there's something about that is positioning me to connect with the Lord in a way that I wouldn't otherwise. And I really believe that that's true. I think that some of us, you're not wired like me, and you don't want to be up in front of people. My wife would be, she's in that camp with you if that's the way you feel. And to you, I would say the opposite is probably also true. That if you are more comfortable being in a space where you're less visible, it might just be that there is actually an access to intimacy and connection with God that you can't otherwise experience unless you're stepping into a more visible place. So let's look a little bit at the nature of God. I want to show you something that I find to be incredibly profound. I was reading the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, one day, and this just jumped out at me. In Matthew 6 is where I'm going to go. There's this series of Jesus is talking about giving to the poor, he's talking about praying, and he's talking about fasting. And he's kind of underscoring one particular thing as he flows through each of these. Anybody remember what he's talking about when he says, when you do these things, he says, don't do them in public places. He says, don't let people see. Right? But listen to the language of this. I'm not going to read all the passages. I'm just going to highlight. So first he's talking about giving to the poor. He says, but when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Okay? So he's saying there's something about being in secret that actually positions you to be seen by the Father. Okay? Now, even more interesting, if you keep reading, you go to the Lord's Prayer. I'm reading right in the middle of that, verse 6. He says, but when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. Well, that's interesting. He says that same thing, and then he goes on to say, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And then with fasting, he does the same thing. He says, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So Jesus is actually underlining, hey, how's it going? I got to swim with you this week. Good to see you. He's underlining something of the nature of God here. He's saying the Father hangs out in secret. I think that's fascinating. We often talk about how God reveals himself, how he manifests, how he shows himself. And he does that, but that's not where he hangs out. He hangs out in secret. Jump to the next slide. Oh, sorry. I'm not doing great. You're doing great, Tammy. Or Tanya. I was talking about Tammy earlier. Okay, so this gives us a good picture of where God hangs out. This is in the midst of the giving of the Ten Commandments, but this version of it is in Deuteronomy. And God is saying to, Moses is saying to Israel, he's speaking. He says, you, Israel, came near and you stood at the foot of the mountain while the mountain burned with fire to the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud and gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form. Is this not a picture of God being in hiddenness? Even in God's revelation to Israel, he's hiding in fire, he's hiding in cloud and in gloom and in darkness. That's where he's hanging out. If you jump to, I'm not going to go there, but Isaiah 45, he says, you are a God who hides. He defines God as someone who hides, right? Think about the story of Jacob in Genesis 28. This is where Jacob falls asleep and he has a dream and angels and God's showing up and speaking to him in the dream. And when Jacob wakes up, he says, surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know it. He didn't recognize that God was there. This is the nature of God. God actually reveals himself as one who hides. Interesting, you go to a New Testament version of this. After the resurrection, you remember 2 disciples are walking to Emmaus, and who's walking with them? Jesus. Do they know that Jesus is walking with them? No. They don't. It says something like their eyes were unable to perceive him. It was like Jesus was wearing some kind of invisibility cloak. Right? So even after the resurrection, like this is when Jesus is revealing himself, and yet he's still hidden. Now think about that. If you are someone who wants to hang out with God, what does that mean of you? It means sometimes you're going to be in a place of hiddenness. Sometimes you're not going to be seen. You know what it also means, which is incredibly frustrating and it bothers me to no end, is that sometimes you are not going to perceive where God is. You're actually going to feel abandoned by God. Anybody ever felt abandoned by God? Let's be real. Come on. Like every other day at least, I feel abandoned, probably every day. I feel abandoned by God. Where are you? Kyle, you're just in the grocery store. Just go over to the next aisle. You'll find what you need, you know. Sometimes you will feel like God is not there. Why can't I see you? Why can't I recognize you? But you remember, Hebrews 11 says that faith is the conviction of things not seen, right? How deep is your faith going to be if God is always manifesting himself in your life? You're going to lack some depth in your faith if you don't go through times when you can't perceive his presence. That is a gift. There are times when God is not recognizable in your life, and those are meant to be a gift for you. It's hard to feel like it's a gift, right? Now, to those of you who are not wired like me and you're like, I'm feeling pretty good about all this. I don't mind hiddenness one bit. Let me tell you about someone who also didn't mind a little bit of hiddenness, and that's the woman at the well. You remember, she goes, in John chapter 4, she goes to the well in the middle of the day. Why did she go in the middle of the day? Anybody know? Hey, look at you guys. I have a bunch of Bible scholars here. She went in the middle of the day because it's the heat of the day and no one else is going to collect water. Why is she doing that? Because she does not want to be seen. Why doesn't she want to be seen? Because she's ashamed and because she's afraid. Right? That's not the kind of hiddenness that I'm talking about. And so if you are someone who values being in a place of hiddenness and it's because of shame or it's because of fear, that's something that God actually wants to deliver you from. And notice what happens at the end of the story of the woman at the well. She has a profound encounter with Jesus, and so much so that she leaves her jar. She forgets the reason that she's there, and she runs to the town of people who would likely reject her, right? And it says, come see whatever she says. I don't have it memorized. Say it again, Susie. Yeah, right. So, even in that, she's saying, I've been seen. And it actually wasn't so bad, right? I was drawn out of hiding. And now I'm free from the shame and can declare to all of you. To those of you who would prefer to stay in hiding, in Acts chapter 1, when Jesus is about to float up into the clouds, he says to the disciples, you will be my witnesses, right? Well, as a witness, what are we saying? Like, as a witness, we're saying, I've seen God, it changed my life, and now I'm going to let you see me so that you can see God. That's what we're doing as witnesses. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 calls us ambassadors. That's the same concept, right? It's my life has been changed by the presence of God, so much so that I'm going to come and I'm going to image God to you. I've been pulled into the life of Jesus, and I've been transformed, and as such, my life is going to impact you because it's so filled with Jesus. That's what it means to be an ambassador, right? And you can't do that in places of hiddenness. So God hangs out in secret, but he's so compelled by love that he reveals himself. And we are drawn out of shame. Shame is broken off of our lives. And we show ourselves to the world because of love. We're compelled by love. God is so good and so beautiful, and I love him, and I love you, and I want to bring that reality to you. So do you see these dynamics, that both of these are really important, both hiddenness and manifestation, and that they're both a part of who God is, right? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And Tanya, I'm going to go quadrant by quadrant. So you'll hit next and it'll show you. So first in the upper right quadrant, so you see you've got God on the God and me on the vertical, and you've got hiddenness and manifestation on the horizontal. So when God is revealing himself, when we're talking about manifestation, we're talking about revealing. When God is manifesting in my life, he's blessing me. We are in receiving mode. In times of our life and moments of our life where God shows up and does something profound, or he speaks to us or whatever, even when he challenges us, even when he convicts us, it's meant to be a blessing, right? Because God is love. He's expressing love. Okay? What about when God is hiding? God is building us. In times when you are not recognizing God's presence, he's not abandoning you. He's still there. He's just hiding, right? And those are moments and seasons when he is cultivating deep and important things. He's growing faith. He's growing fruits. He's testing those things in you. And that test is not a pass-fail test. It's a refining test. Things get refined in us in those seasons that are hard and painful, right? What about in seasons the lower left, when I am in place of hiddenness, like covered in kitchen grime? In times when you are not being seen by others, that is an opportunity for you to devote yourself to God. Those are times when you get to be a living sacrifice. And this isn't just like when you're like serving. This is like when you're going through something and you feel like no one sees me, no one knows what I'm going through. Those are meant to be an offering too. Those are meant to be an opportunity for you to say, God, no one is seeing. No one can relate to me, but you see me. And so I'm giving this to you as an offering. God loves that. There's a precious treasure that happens in those moments and times when you get to just purely give something to God. There's a freedom in that when no one can see you. I'm learning that. I'm learning to embrace that and treasure that. And then lastly, what about the times when I am manifesting. We usually talk about that in terms of like demonic and deliverance, and that's not the kind I mean. But when we are in Christ and God brings us into places where we are visible, it's because he's intended that we embody who he is to the world around us. Jesus says, let your light shine before men, that they would see your good works and that they would glorify your Father in heaven. There's something about you being who you are with Jesus, and I think that we can actually interpret good works loosely. If we're actually walking with God, then even the way that we're walking through the grocery store and putting things in our cart, that actually embodies something to the world. Right? If we're living from a place of, I am just full of joy. I'm full of peace at the goodness of who God is. My paycheck was really small, but I'm so confident that God is with me and for me. I'm good. I get to live in abundance. I'm not saying, anyway, I don't want to go down a rabbit trail. But so think about this, and I want you to just think about your life. Think about where you are right now. What is God doing with you? How is God relating to you? How is God inviting you to relate to the world? Sometimes it's a choice that we get to make, that we feel like God is doing something. Sometimes it's not a choice, and we're just thrown into a different way of relating to God and a different way of relating to the world. But what we want to do is we want to get more aware of that. We want to recognize the patterns of what am I experiencing? What pain am I experiencing? And where is God in that? Because if we don't do that, if we don't grow in awareness and discernment of what God is doing, then you know what we'll do? If we like one of these particular quadrants and we find ourselves in another quadrant, but we don't actually think about the fact that God is in that, we'll reject it. We'll avoid it. We'll deny it. We'll try to squeeze ourselves back into another space that feels like this is how God relates to me. This is always how it's supposed to be. And so I'm going to make myself be over here. Don't do that. Look for, God, what are you doing? What are you doing in my life right now? What does it look like for me to partner with you in this season? So what I'd love to do now is even just like, I'd love to just like invite you to just sit with that for a second. I'm going to give you a practical here in a second, but for right now, I just want you to sit with, where do I feel like God has me right now? Okay. Once you go to the last slide there, I like to give some practical direction. And so this is kind of like if you're feeling drawn to either you feel like God is inviting you into a place of hiddenness or a place of unhiddenness, manifestation. These could be some different ways that you could apply that. So if you feel like God is inviting you into a place of hiddenness, maybe you could give a tangible offering to God without anyone knowing. It could be a fast, it could be a generous gift, or a private time of worship. Or maybe walking through a park and picking up trash without anyone noticing. Like just think, like what's a practical thing that you could do that no one is going to see and no one is going to know about? And you get to just say, God, this gets to be something that's just for you. Or if it's the opposite, maybe you're feeling like, I think he might be inviting me to become a little bit more visible. Share something up front at church. I happen to know a church that welcomes that. Maybe next time someone has a microphone and they're looking for someone to raise your hand, what if you just did that? Pray for someone in a public setting. What if you just look around when you're out and about and look for someone to just ask, like, hey, would it be okay if I prayed for you? That's an incredibly vulnerable thing to do. You feel really exposed when you ask someone that. You're exposed to rejection when you ask them that. Try to sing a little louder than the person next to you. I think that one's that's fun. It's not a pride thing. It's not about trying to impress anybody. What it is it's actually a humility thing. Because what you're doing when you do that, when you step into a place of higher visibility, here's the posture I want you to take, is to say, if it's true, Jesus, that I am now a new creation, then I must have so much to offer to the people around me. And if I have something to offer the people around me, it probably doesn't matter so much what it is that I'm doing, just as much as that I'm doing something that puts me out there where people can experience and receive me. Does that make sense? That's the posture you get to take. That's not a pride thing. That's actually humility. Pride is actually when you choose to believe something about yourself that's in opposition to what God says is true about you. That's pride. And so if Jesus is saying you're a new creation, you're like me now, don't be arrogant, just accept it. All right. I'll pray for you.